It's about to get heavy. I'm talking in your face. Ain't no holding back. Better watch out. Gloves are coming off, baby. Ha! Yeah, that digger needs a throat punch. Jesus, please move on somebody. Lord, he needs some prayer. Bless his heart. You know, nowadays, people care more about themselves and their kingdom than they ever cared about God and His. Can I get an amen? Why don't you step into my shoes, buckle up in my chair, and sit behind my desk for a day? We're about to get started, so grab some popcorn. It's time for Behind the Desk with me, your boy, Pastor J.K. Let's get ready to roll, y'all. But before we get started, give me 2 claps and a Ric Flair. Woo! Howdy, folks, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Behind the Desk with me, your boy, JK. So this guest, I've not had the blessing of getting to know or spend a whole lot of time with in person, but I have had the privilege of being able to play 18 holes of golf with this gentleman at a pastor's outing. And I mean, hey, if pastors can't get to know each other during golf, I don't know what other way they're going to. But we have a connection through a mutual friend. We've had conversations online, and it just seems like I've known this guy for years, even though we may have only known each other for 2 years. He's had multiple roles during his ministry at different locations within the same church at church plants. He's a man with many talents, and I would say any senior pastor would be lucky to have him on staff. He's a wonderful husband. He's a dad of 3. Here is my buddy and soon to be yours, Mr. Clint Conner.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Looking forward to it. And yeah, I was going to say it was really cool getting to know you a little bit better over the 18 holes of golf. And I did get to know that I don't want to ride in a golf cart with you.
Oh, man. So I had to throw the golf part in there just to see if you'd laugh. And I mean, yeah. So to preface this for everyone, you were sandbagging on us most of that day, dude, because you ended up carrying the team. And especially after Adam and I almost flipped that golf cart over. I mean, it was, granted, he was driving, but it was my pressure, go, 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 up the hill that just about flipped us. But man, that was an amazing day, just finally being able to spend some time in person with you and hang out. It was a blast, man. I'm glad you got to come along with us.
Yeah, I was really glad I got to. It was, I think that was the first time we actually got to really hang out in person. I know we connected on Facebook earlier, and I think maybe I'd met you in passing at being up at Bethel sometime, during the week when I was hanging with Adam or something. But it was really cool to get to hang out with you guys on the golf course that day.
Oh, yeah. And I remember us joking saying, all right, let's see which team's really good, because those pastors that are really good, they spend more time on the golf course than sermon prepping. Like we were talking pre-show, if we can't laugh, especially at ourselves, then the world can't laugh at anything that they do. So we as Christians, we have to take things in stride, and we have to laugh at ourselves sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we don't need to take ourselves too seriously. And if you can't laugh at yourself, then I mean, hey, that's not a good thing. It's always, I think it's a healthy thing and a good thing to be able to laugh at dumb things you do or silly things you do. But yeah, absolutely. We got to be able to laugh and have a good time.
Oh, yeah. I spend too much time laughing at myself. I do a lot of dumb things.
I do my fair share. So.
All right, brother. Well, let's jump right in here. And I want our audience to kind of know where you're coming from. So how many years have you been serving in the ministry, and exactly what all roles have you served in?
Oh, wow. So let's see. I actually entered full-time ministry back in 2003. So I've been in full-time ministry, I guess. Well, there was a couple years that I took a little hiatus, so probably about 17 or 18 years.
Wow.
I'm working on in full-time ministry. I've been in several different roles throughout that time period. I started off actually as a missionary. We were missionaries to the country of Paraguay, South America. So that's how I got started in ministry, and
That's
was in
awesome.
that role for a while. Then when we came home off the field, transitioned from that within probably a couple of years of coming home off the field into a pastoral role. Went from being a missionary to a lead pastor of a small Southern Baptist church in the town we lived in. And from there, God opened the door for me to get connected with where we currently serve. It's a multi-location, multi-site church. And so I've been doing that in various roles since 2014. So some of the things I've done there have been from being an administrative pastor to doing media, basically videography, graphic design, web design, probably anything media related. And then also I've overseen discipleship in small groups, and currently am serving back in a lead pastor role with one of our new church plants.
Man, that is awesome. That I hit the nail on the head when I said a man of many talents, especially when it comes to the ministry.
Yeah, I tell you, it's crazy when you're in ministry, and I think you'll relate to this. We may have a specific area we serve in, or even I guess you could say title we have, but as well as I do, you end up pretty much doing anything and everything, and a lot of things that you never would dream would be something you'd learn how to do. You learn how to do.
They got those one size fits all hats, and a lot of times pastors wear the one size does it all hats.
Absolutely.
So you kind of hit on how you started as a missionary. So can you give us a little detail about how that call came about?
Yeah. So back then, I was about a year before then. I'd already had answered the call into ministry, in the sense of that about a year earlier, I had answered the call to preach. And so I've been doing that as kind of a lay preacher in the church we were serving in. And I didn't know exactly where God was, leading at that moment. I didn't feel like it was towards pastoring. I felt more like it would be in missions and evangelism, but I didn't really know in what way. And so through a series of events throughout that year, the place I worked for at the time laid me off, and due to financial circumstances. And so it was during this time. Well, let me back up just a little bit before I say that. Actually, right before I got laid off from the job I was at, which was building and repairing PCs back then. So used to do that, and all the stuff associated with that. There was a gentleman that came in the office we had, and he saw a Bible on my desk and asked me if I was a Christian, and told him I was. And we began striking up a conversation about spiritual things. Found out he was a missionary in the country of Paraguay.
Wow.
They were home to deal with some documents for their residency paperwork, and we exchanged email addresses. And that was actually about a year prior. And so for about a year, we kind of corresponded some off and on. And then I'll jump back to where I got laid off from my job. He had actually come back home again to deal with a family issue. And so he had stopped by the office, and we began talking. And he said, I've actually got to, even though I'm home dealing with this, he said, I have to make a trip back down there. Would you be interested in going with me, just like on a missions trip? And thought, well, yeah, absolutely. And did, spent 2 weeks there. And it was during the 2 weeks that I was there that God really began to move in my heart, and was reading in Isaiah chapter 6 one day, and came across that verse, about hearing the voice of the Lord, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, here my Lord sent me. And it was just God used that verse, in my heart over and over again as I was meditating on that he wanted me to go and to preach the gospel there to the country of Paraguay. And so came home. My wife and I had been, spending some time praying about this, and then we believed that that's what God wanted us to do. And so we began the process of raising our support pretty much within about a couple of months, I guess. And so basically that's how I transitioned into doing that. And we spent the next probably 3.5 years traveling the bulk of the Eastern United States and trying to raise support.
Man, that's awesome. It's amazing how God puts people that we think are random in our lives only to show us how we need to move to be able to make sure we're staying in God's will. That is awesome, man.
Yeah, it was really crazy because when we interacted that one day back in 2002 and exchanged emails, I really never would have dreamed, at that point, that would be a relationship, and then what developed into a friendship and a partnership in the country of Paraguay together, that God would use that random, and it wasn't really random, but it felt random at the time, encounter to move us in that direction.
And that's I love hearing stories like this. And especially now, I know I'm going to enjoy this podcast because, like I said, we've only been able to interact a little bit. So I'm going to be just like the audience, and I'm going to be learning so much. But now there is one thing that I do know, and well, at least I'm pretty sure I know, if memory does serve me right. There was a time that, and I think you mentioned it already, that you left ministry for just a little while. And
Yeah.
I had actually done the same thing. And I've kind of shared on previous episodes a little bit of what that was. But I mean, we know that we're called, but yet there comes a time when ministry is just not ministry anymore. And sometimes we have to take a step back. So what was that season of you and your family's life like?
So yeah, it was probably about a 2-year period, maybe, starting in the summer of 2016. Um, it it was kind of a thing that, looking back on it now, I really probably should have saw a lot of, things that would have pointed to that I needed a break earlier. But yeah, I stepped away for a couple years, and a lot of it was just, and I didn't realize it at the time. But looking back on it, I was so burned out. And as I said, I'd served as the lead pastor of a church, small Southern Baptist church, in the community we live for about about 4 years rather, almost. And it was my first pastorate. I was young. I was in my early 30s at that point. I think I was 33 when I began pastoring that church. It was, I was going to say, it was a situation that I probably wasn't as prepared for as I thought I was. It's like one of those things, you can learn any skill, you can learn all these things in college, and then when you get in the real world, you find out that degree really doesn't mean as much as you thought it did until you start really experiencing and living out, day-to-day situations. And so early on, I had a major sin issue within less than 2 months that came about that I had to handle. And it just seemed like it was almost like one thing after another. And I had a pastor friend I'll never forget. He said, brother, he said, you've endured more in just a few years, this ministry that a lot of guys go through in a lifetime. And it was a tough season. And so looking back on it now, I realized that I didn't have a good outlet. I didn't have someone, I guess you could say, for accountability or even discipleship purposes, or even just someone outside of that ministry that had no idea anything about it, that I could even vent to, or things like that. And so a lot of this just built up over those 4 years. And so when I knew God was moving me on and we left, and God brought us to where we currently serve now, I still was carrying a lot of that baggage with me. And about a year into serving with currently where we are, was in a different role at that point, but there were a couple other situations that happened that were very stressful, very just, really hard to handle, I guess. And it just kind of piled on top of what had already happened. And it just was just kind of more and more. And I didn't realize how spiritually unhealthy I had gotten in that season, just from not dealing with that hurt and dealing with the burnout. And so it just kind of really boiled over to a point where I was just like, man, I can't do this anymore. I'm just, I never forget. I sat down and met with our lead pastor at the time. And he also, is the lead pastor currently where we're at. And I just said, look, I said, I'm done. I'm done. And I said, all I care about, just give me basically a few months, if of severance, if you guys would, so I can take care of my family during the transition. And I just want to focus on finding a job. And I was like, that's all I'm worried about. And that's kind of what happened. And man, I tell you, I was at that moment didn't realize how spiritually unhealthy I was, and how burned out I was. And so I think a lot of times as pastors, we don't properly handle things that happen to us and hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We don't handle just admitting or just being honest and saying, hey, you know what, I need a break. And I think if I could have done that earlier and been like, hey, I really, when I transitioned from one ministry to the other, I think it would have been really good if I could have had a little more time to kind of sit. And what was sad was that was kind of offered to me at the time, and being young and dumb, I'm like, nope, I just need to be busy. I need to be doing stuff, that's going to help me. And I thought it would, but it didn't. It just really made the problem worse. And so that's kind of what got me to that season where we actually took a 2-year break from full-time ministry. And it was at that moment when I took that break, I was in probably a really dark place. But in that 2 years, God really did some amazing things in my heart and in my life. And it was also in that 2-year period that I met Adam. It was also during that 2-year period that God just connected us with a wonderful church family that wasn't connected with where we were serving, that we could just go and really heal and be ministered to. And then I'm sure we'll get to this later on, but after that 2-year period, God opened the door for me to come back basically to the same church that I was serving with prior to that, and just in a different role. But it's been definitely a good thing. And looking back on it, I wouldn't trade those 2 years that I had away from ministry for anything, because God taught me so much in that season and helped me so much to be, I guess, the person I am today, the leader I am today, and the pastor that I am today, because of that season of life.
Absolutely, man. And you kept using a word that a lot of people may not understand, and that's burnout. It is very easy in the ministry to suffer from burnout. I mean, we as pastors, we get pushed to our limit, and we have all this stuff on our backs, and yet we have to still remember, though, that we have been called by God and not by man. So when people and things come at us, it is easy to get discouraged. It is easy to hit that burnout, and struggles come and struggles go. But sometimes they cut us to the core, and we do just have to take a step back, take a step away. And I like what you were talking about, how you had that season to heal. And I myself did not take the season to heal in between ministries. And like you said, I mean, it'll blow up in our face when we have no intentions of that happening. So in your experience, what leads to more disappointment, heartache, church hurt, whatever you want to call it, in ministry more than anything else, in your own opinion?
So I think, at least for me, I don't know, maybe, and I think I've seen this maybe with some other people as well, but I know this was true in my own life and personal experience. For me, it was, allowing your eyes to be moved from Christ. And I think, author of Hebrews says that we look to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. And I think for me, it was taking my eyes off Christ and who he is and who he says I am, and focusing on the redemptive work that he's accomplishing in and through me. And I think it's really easy to take your eyes off that and put them on people and what they've done and their actions, instead of, and we kind of tend to, I think, forget that we're all just broken, flawed people. And, we do the exact, let's just be honest. We've been guilty of the exact same things of, doing things to hurt people unintentionally. And sometimes maybe even, we've acted in the flesh. And, I have no problem admitting there have been times that, I've intentionally done stuff I knew that would be hurtful to somebody because I was angry or they'd hurt me. And it was kind of like, this is my way to get back. But I think for me, I just allowed myself to have my focus shifted from Christ and onto what was happening in the circumstances and the actions of those around me. I think that leads to disappointment. Going back to the gentleman that I met when I was working building computers, I'll never forget when we were on deputation at that point in our life to raise our support. He made a statement and he said, don't ever look to man. He said, man will always let you down. He said, don't look
Amen.
to me, because he said, I'll let you down. And it was a very prophetic word, because there was a circumstance that in a major way we were let down by this guy. And so I thought, wow, but it was such good advice, because he said, always look to God, because God's never going to fail you. God will never let you down. And I think so often we focus on circumstances, we focus on actions of people, but then also I think what leads to disappointment and hurt and even maybe into burnout is our unrealistic expectations we place on other people.
Oh, come on now. Come on.
Yeah. I know, I don't know. So from my background, without getting too much into, I guess, running a rabbit trail, I come from a very fundamentalist, legalistic background. And so we always kind of were taught that the pastor or the man of God, as we would maybe hear in the past, was always up on this pedestal up here. And it led to us having unrealistic expectations of the pastor. And I think that was unhealthy, and that led to a lot of that. But then also, I think that even as a pastor, I had unrealistic expectations of the people God had given me to shepherd. And so when they acted like broken, flawed human beings that they are, that just like I am, I think that when I focused on that, it was really easy to be like, man, I can't believe they did that, or I can't believe they said that, or man, I can't believe they would treat me or my family that way. But not knowing, there's been a whole lot of times I'm sure I've done something and someone said, man, I can't believe he would say that, or I can't believe he would treat me that way. And so I think for me, that was a lot of it. And just taking my eyes off Christ. And when you do that, it just, a whole host of things that opens up a whole, I guess you could say, Pandora's box of bad things that can happen to us spiritually when we move from focusing on Jesus to focusing on, people.
Absolutely. There is tremendous amount of truth in that. And like you said, with the Pandora's box reference, sometimes we have no idea what we're getting into, or we bite off more than we can chew, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. And I also like what you said about, we can't put pastors up on a pedestal, because, the only difference between the pastor and a regular member of the church, in my opinion, is the pastor is just supposed to be the shepherd. He is no different. He's just leading, and he needs to lead by example. But people do tend to put some unrealistic expectations onto pastors. Now,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to get a little personal here and see if you're willing to share one or maybe even more of some of those negative experiences that you may have had, where maybe somebody's just blatantly come out and attacked you, or did something that really just rattled your ministry.
Yeah. So there are probably several I could cite or share, but I guess probably one of the ones that stands out most was the major sin issue I had to deal with. And I think it was like less than 2 months into my pastorate. Again, like I said, I think I'm 32 going on 33 at this point, when this is happening. And so it comes out, and myself and the chairman of the deacon board, we go and we meet with the person, and we can confront the issue and try to get some resolution to it. And, the meeting did not go well at all with the individual. And well, in fact, we actually had to meet with the parent of the individual because it was their child. And so it really went badly. I didn't expect it to go that way. And then about a week later, the child, and I say child, I mean, they were a college student, but gets on Facebook and basically just says something that was completely untrue, that did not happen, and then just called the church out by name. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow. It's like, yeah, that is not at all what happened. And basically, the sin issue that we were confronting wasn't even the sin issue that this person later on exposed was going on in their life. And so it got really bad. I remember getting Facebook messages from people I didn't even know.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, basically trying to tell me what a horrible person I was. And so I guess probably, and it just that. And I remember getting emails from people, and it's a small community. So even like this was 2010. So, I mean, it's been like 12 years ago and there are people still talking about it.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a small community. But, things were said, and I had people telling me like, well, this person told me this is what happened. And I would be like, no, that's not what happened at all. Well, they wouldn't lie to me and they wouldn't make this up. But I'm like, well, you weren't in the room. They weren't even in the room. Their parent was. And I'm like, they are lying to you. But that went on for, gosh, that was probably like 6 months or more. And basically the person tried to come out and say, we had banned them from coming to church, which was not even true at all. They had just had a position to where they were on the platform and they were in front of the church. And we had just told them as long as this issue persisted in their life, they wouldn't be allowed to sing and be on the platform. And that was taken and twisted that we had told them they weren't allowed to come to church. And so it was a really hurtful situation, I think, because of that. But that was, like I said early on, that was one of the first things. I think probably the other thing that comes to mind is when I resigned and when I left that particular ministry. Probably didn't handle it the best of ways. And, it was a very contentious situation. I think that, I did things on my part that I wished I could go back and do differently. I hope that the people on the other side would feel the same way. And I think a lot of them do, because I've actually had conversations with many of them over the last few years. And, there's been some reconciliation there, and we've talked, and God has repaired a lot of those relationships that, had been severed, I guess, because of just us being broken, flawed human beings and acting out in that way. But those were probably the two most, I guess, hurtful experiences that I can personally think of. And a lot of that kind of even goes into the burnout later, and just being in a very spiritually unhealthy place, because I really never dealt with those hurts. And so, those were pretty big ones. And like I said, that one initially, it still, in fact, I don't think it's talked about as much, but I know I felt like it always kind of left a cloud hanging over the church there in the ministry, because of what the perception was in the community, based on things that have been said. But, and I tell you, that was really hard to deal with, for me personally, just having to kind of keep my mouth shut, not say anything. And when people would message me, it was hard to ignore, man. My personality is, I'm a hothead. I'll be honest. I have a temper. I have a short fuse. My wife says I have no filter. I relate a lot to Peter in scripture. I speak, and then I think about what I've said later on. I'm like, yeah, probably shouldn't have said that. But, so, it was really hard to take all that criticism. And I don't know how many emails in response I typed up and would delete.
Oh yeah.
And man, that was hard. I actually had a friend recommend that. So, type up what you want to say, respond, and then never send it. It was really hard, but like I said, it was just one of those situations where we had to just trust God to fight that battle for us. But um, that was a really hurt. Like I said, that was probably even more so than the way things ended, was really a hurtful experience. And I tell you, that's a really tough pill, I guess, to swallow. And that's really a tough situation when you're fresh out of Bible college. You've never pastored before. You're in your early 30s. You're green and young and dumb and think you're going to come in and you're going to change everything and you're going to make a huge difference and you're going to do this and do that. And man, I tell you, it was like it all got knocked out from under me quick. And people joke that you have the honeymoon period at a church when you're a pastor. And I don't know how it is with an associate role, but as a lead pastor role, supposedly there's this honeymoon phase where everything's great. Well, people used to say that to me, and I'd be like, "Nope, honeymoon ended." I was like, "Yeah, that honeymoon lasted about 30 to 60 days."
I was going to say your honeymoon period was short on that one for sure. A lot of times you
Yeah,
get about a year of grace, but man, to
yeah,
be like you said, young and green in that bomb be dropped in your lap 2 months in. Wow. I mean, you kind of already hit on what your initial reaction to that was. Man, I have no idea what I would do in that situation because I mean, you can't tell it because I don't have any hair, but I mean, I'm a redhead. You can see it in my beard, but I'm like you, man. I got that short fuse, and it can be easy for me to get a little wound up. I say I love like John, but I fight like Peter. Uh, so I mean, that initial reaction, um, were you in shock, or was it a combination of shock and anger? I mean, like I said, unless I'm in your shoes, I have no idea how I would react at first.
yeah. So at first, I think it was shock, I think, but it quickly, I think, shifted from shock to anger very fast.
Especially when they came after you with the messages and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, it did, and it was tough because you want to lash out and you want to defend yourself and be like, no, especially when what's being said. It'd be different if like what they were saying was accurate, but when they're spreading falsehoods and lies and things like that, and you want to set the record straight, especially when you're really big on integrity and things like that.
Mhm.
And it was really tough. I mean, it went from a season, like I said, of being shocked really to moving quickly into anger, and it was really tough. One of the things though that I think really helped with that was that even through all of that, God was really gracious to us and was sending new people in, and the church was really growing, even despite all of that stuff. And I know there were things that were said about us in the community, but the church was growing, and it was probably within a couple years we began to kind of transition our philosophy of ministry and maybe our ministry model. We began to do more relational evangelism and servant evangelism, and we really began to focus on pushing the church out into the community and serving. And I think that really helped kind of maybe dispel a little bit of that. I mean, like I said, it's still talked about, but I don't think it's not the hot gossip I guess it was, back in 2010. But I think us doing things like that, when people saw it, it's like, well, I can't believe that, if a church would do something like that, if they're in the community doing this, or they're serving in this way, or they're loving in this way. And so I think that really helped a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, that happened somewhere around October, I think, of that year. And honestly, probably through, probably really, to be honest, over the next 6 months to a year, it was tough that first year. And then after we got through that first year, it was like God really began to just change a lot of stuff there. And like I said, we saw new people coming in. He was doing some really cool things in people's lives. And so that really, I think, kind of was a tilting point after that year. But yeah, it was really tough. I was going to say I struggled with being angry about that quite a bit. And to be honest, when I think back about I'm not really mad about it anymore, but it's still like you just shake your head and you're like, man, what in the world? But again, I believe God uses all things. And even in that extremely hurtful experience, God used that to, I think, help mold me and shape me, and to, help me to, I think, be who I am today. And because of that, I think it has helped me, be able to minister to people in a better way and relate to people in a better way. Um, and there's even things about I probably would do differently about the way that we had to confront the issue, maybe. Even though I don't think biblically we were wrong in the way we confronted it, maybe, as someone approaching their mid 40s, I kind of view things a little differently than, I did when I was 32. So, but, like I said, God uses all those things. And so, yeah, he did, he did a huge work there to move out of that season of hurt and discouragement into what, came later.
Well, my next question was going to be, now that time has passed, were you pleased with your reaction? And you pretty much answered that one. You said, yeah, you all were in the right, but I mean, we can always take a step back when things are over, the dust has settled. Man, I could have done that a little bit different. I could have done, maybe I should have done this or should have done that. Because I don't know any other pastor that wouldn't say we are our own worst critics sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And we will beat ourselves up. And I actually had a pastor tell me one time, don't beat yourself up for things you've done wrong, because Jesus already took the beating and hung on the cross for it.
Yep.
So you just
Absolutely.
ask for forgiveness and move on from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's all we can do is ask for forgiveness. And maybe if it's a situation where maybe we even have to ask that person for forgiveness, if, we're able to. And if you're not able to, it's a circumstance where, there's not really a bridge there for you to do that. And I think you to the best of your ability, you do what you can. But yeah, I mean, definitely I look at it and I think that even though biblically I know we were in the right, I still think that there might have been a way to go about it that might have maybe not been perceived as maybe, quite as rough, I guess, as it came across. But at the end of the day, sometimes, I mean, like you said, I mean, you look back on stuff and I know we're always a Monday morning quarterback with things and how we handled it. But, I definitely think there are things that I would like to have maybe changed my approach with. I still would have dealt with the issue and confronted the issue. I just think maybe, I think maybe I would have changed my approach on just a couple of things on that, looking back on it now. But sadly, I think because of the nature of what the sin was, I feel like it probably would have ended the same and it probably wouldn't have really mattered. But it would have just been one of those things for my own, I guess, peace of mind and my own walk with God, that I could know that I did everything, as best I could to be like Jesus in that moment and to demonstrate Christ-like behavior towards that person. And so, I think that would be, what I would say to that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Bible says we're to try our best to remain blameless. And sometimes, man, it is so hard to do that.
Absolutely.
Now, in not just that situation, but in any situation, is there a particular one verse or even a section of scripture or maybe a Bible story that's able to rescue you through those situations?
So, like when I think about just some of the discouragement and hurt and things like that, I think about, especially if it's a situation where I guess you've been wronged maybe, and something maybe has happened to you. And I know as pastors, a lot of times we all have, I guess, our war stories of of our battle scars and things that have happened. But and I'm really blanking on the verse, but it's oh gosh, it's in the Old Testament, but it might be in Joshua, or it might be in the Psalms. But it talks about that. I'm sorry, it's not. It's probably back in Exodus, because it's when Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they come to the Red Sea, and they're griping, they're complaining, they're murmuring. It's like, God's already delivered them in a miraculous way out of Egypt, and so they're at the Red Sea thinking, man, we're going to die, they're going to get us. And Moses basically tells them, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And then there's another reference to something like that, that basically to be still, that God will fight for us. And I think in those moments that it's really important for us to take a step back, especially if there's been, a hurt done to us, there's been something towards us, or, disappointment, discouragement, whatever it is. I think it's important for us to kind of step back and just wait on God and let God handle that. And because, he can handle that way better than we can.
Amen.
I know he can change hearts. He can do things in a person's life that we're incapable of doing. And a lot of times, God knows what needs to happen in someone's life, maybe to bring them to a place to where, they realize, man, I didn't realize what I did. Or maybe, God brings them to a place to where it's like he really convicts them about that. And it could just be a situation where God rights that wrong for us. Or if, maybe, I guess you could say, we never maybe see, I guess, as we would term it, we look at it and we think, well, okay, we want them to get their just due. Maybe, in our point of view, they never do, but it could be one of those things to where, as we're standing and still and we're waiting on God, that God works in us and changes us. And so I think for me in those seasons, it was standing still and waiting for the salvation of the Lord, and just waiting for God to take care of those situations, and waiting for God to make the things right that needed to be made right. And if, I guess I could say from a human point of view, if I didn't feel like maybe it was made right, that I could still be like, it's okay. I mean, because again, Romans says that all things work together for our good, and that God uses those things, even the hurtful things and the horrible things and the bad things, all those. I know it's almost cliche to say, and sometimes maybe some people might take it as insulting, but it truly is, a thing that God takes all those experiences, and I mean, they will be used for our ultimate good. We just maybe don't see it, but so for me, that was, I think, what really helped me through those seasons, and that time in my life was focusing on God, and standing still and waiting for his salvation, and waiting for him to take care of the situation, instead of me trying to get involved and handle it on my own.
I'm right there with you. I don't know how many times I've had to say, self, get out of the way, let go and let God.
Yep, absolutely.
How were you able to see God's hand moving in your life and helping you grow through those situations?
So for me, I think one of the ways that I saw God working in my life through that was, I think God uses those hurtful and harmful situations to kind of maybe break some of the pride in us, and break some of the things in us that are maybe where we're maybe, trusting a little too much in ourselves, and maybe even we think a little too much of our own ability. But I think for me, it was God used those hurtful circumstances to break some things in me. Because I'll be really honest, it's really easy for me, because I mean, I inherit this honestly from, I think, my mom and my grandmother on her side, that, it's kind of that old saying, I'll forgive you, but I won't forget. And
I hear you.
And I think that, that's my natural tendency, and I know that's all of our natural tendencies, but I really lean in that direction when it's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. That's how you are. Well, let me, here's how I'm going to be, and I think God used those situations to just hope to help chisel that away and break that away for me, to where it's, I think when I see that now, it doesn't make me as angry. I mean, there are certain things I see that still make me angry, I guess, but in those situations, I'm like, it just really makes me sad for those people, because just to see how empty and void their lives really are. But I think it also just, as God chips that stuff away at you, it just helps you, it softens you, and I think it just helps you identify with where people really are. And those people that that say hurtful things to us and harmful things, and that do hurtful and harmful things to us. Jesus died for them, and just like he died for me, and I need grace just as much as they need grace. And understanding that we're all equal at the foot of the cross. We're all jacked up, broken messes. I mean, and we're all just messed up people, that need the redemptive, grace of Jesus in our lives. And so I think it just helped me to kind of live into that a little bit more.
I like that. You were talking about chiseling away at it. And I heard it one time and even described myself this way, that a lot of times I'll run in and throw a stick of dynamite in there and just blow the whole thing up, when I really need to go in with a chisel and a hammer and just work a little bit at a time to get through situations.
Yeah. I could relate to that, especially the throwing the stick of dynamite, because I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, well, here, let me just throw this in here. I'm going to take care of that right now. That'll fix everything. And, it's kind of, kind of like the bull in the china shop thing. And I can really, if I'm not careful, I really default to that. And so I think, like you said, using that hammer and that chisel to kind of be like, instead of, blowing this thing up, let me go in here and kind of, a little bit at a time, work away at this. And I think God uses those to do that in our lives, to where he's chiseling away at us to make us just, more like Jesus every day through those situations.
And I don't know why it just now came to me. I've never thought of this analogy before. But an onion, when you're peeling an onion, sometimes the tears are coming, and people are a lot like onions. As we peel back the layers, there's probably going to be tears.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So why do you think that God allowed you to go through those struggles and those experiences?
I think ultimately, when I look back on it now, I think because coming from a very legalistic and fundamentalist background, we weren't really taught to be very compassionate about things. It was almost kind of, I don't know if this would be the right way to describe it, but it's almost like some people came across like they took pleasure in like the idea of things happening to people, or God, oh, that's God judging them, or, oh, they're, God's going to do this in their life. And there was very little focus on compassion and grace and forgiveness. And it was, like I said, very very harsh in a lot of ways. And so, coming out of that, when I first started pastoring, I still, I wasn't identifying as that, I guess, that vein anymore, as, the fundamentalist, legalistic guy. But I was still struggling with a lot of things that came with that. And so I think, from looking back on it now, God allowed me to go through those things because it just helped break that stuff down. Because now I look at people, and, even the people that aggravate me to death, when I look at them, I'm just like, man, they're so, like, it's like it's just some people you just don't, vibe with or gel with. And it's just like, they just get on your last nerve. And I think it helps me to be a little more compassionate towards people. And then even people that are just, they're living in sin openly, it's helped me to be a lot more compassionate, because, before it was just like this idea of, well, you better get saved because you're going to hell, kind of, and instead of realizing, a person who, has no relationship with Christ, I mean, yes, that is where they're headed because their sin has condemned them already. But yet, I think, demonstrating the compassion that, I mean, yes, you're condemned in your sins, but let me explain to you how much God loves you, because, that he would do this for you. And I think it just helps to identify with where people are. But I think for me, looking back on it, it's just, it's helped me be way more compassionate towards other people. And I think that's definitely been a good thing, because that's something that I've really struggled with early on, coming from that fundamentalist background. Was there wasn't a lot of compassion for people, that I guess were living in sin, people that were controlled by sin or things like that. It was just kind of really, oh, they're the enemy type thing and looked at that way. And so I think it's really helped kind of break me in a way that when I look at them now, I see them totally different. And so for me, I think God used all of that to bring me to just a much better place as far as how I see other people.
Awesome. And so again, I love it when I ask one question and my guests go in and kind of start answering that second question. You've hit on some of them. There may be some other lessons that you learned that you want to add in there. But besides what you were just talking about the compassion and being all things unto all men, what other lessons do you think that you gained that God can use in you moving forward?
So I think some other things I learned was one of the things that I would say was definitely a big lesson for me was I think it's in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus talks about coming apart to a desert place to rest for a while. And I heard this years ago in my fundamentalism days, but I think it's such a great statement that if you don't come apart for a while, you will come apart.
Oh yeah, that's heavy. Yes.
And I thought about that in relation to that verse, and I think that one of the things that I've really taken away from all of the experiences and everything is that we have to intentionally, and I emphasize intentionally, because you have to work at it to build in time to just come apart from everything, to decompress, to unplug, to just get away from things. And I did a really bad job of that in my first pastorate. And I was one of those guys. And again, the way I saw, I guess, that model demonstrated as a young Christian and a young preacher in the ministry was that basically, I hate to word it this way, but it's kind of like as a pastor, you're married to the church. And so, which is kind of, unbiblical to think about, because the church is Jesus's bride, not ours. And so
Ooh, that's good.
well, that's not original. Definitely not original. But yeah, I just think for me, learning to come apart and to decompress, to unplug, and to intentionally have times in my life that's like I'm gonna rest, and I'm gonna unplug from ministry. I'm gonna unplug from especially social media.
Yes.
That's a big one. Unplug from, and I think this is another big one. I encourage people to do this all the time. Unplug from the news. That is one of the unhealthiest things we do is watch the news and get on social media and talk about it. But I think doing those things and taking time to just spend with my family doing things. And so, we moved probably about almost 4 years ago now to where we are. When I came on staff at the church, we knew we were going to have to move. And so when we moved, there's a lot of great stuff to do here where we live. And so one of the things we really enjoyed doing was going to the minor league baseball games here during the summer and taking in a ball game. Baseball was a thing I loved as a kid growing up. And so we would do that. We got to where we'd go out and walk around the neighborhood, or there's a beautiful walking trail on the river here in town. And so we'll go do that, and just things to get away and just rest. I mean, because one of the things that helped me so much with that, and I'm gonna give a shameless plug to a book that was really helpful. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and it was written by a pastor by the name of John Mark Comer, and he just recently stepped down from his church this past year, but he pastored a church in Portland, Oregon. And he talks about that very thing, about slowing down the pace of life we live and not being in such a hurry. And so I think those are things that really, are things that I would advocate for people to do. Those were big takeaways for me is learning to not be married to ministry, because I think as pastors, we forget that our primary ministry is to our family first and foremost. And so I think over the years, sadly, we've neglected that, all for the idea of that we're being faithful to the ministry of the church and things like that. And I just, if it scares me, I think, my big fear would be standing before Christ on Judgment Day, knowing that even if the entire church that I shepherded and oversaw, if they all were believers and Christians and they all, had eternal life, but if my family did not, that would be rough. And so I think that we, need to make sure we're not married to ministry, and that we've got to have healthy boundaries. And so I think it's that, like I said, to me, that has been my big takeaway from everything is, and sometimes I think default too far the other way on this now. Like when I come home from the office, if I'm not careful, I can go too far the other way and be like, oh, it's after office hours. Hey, sorry. And I have to fight against that now because I'm too fearful of going back the other way. And so I think there's a balance there. But I just want to encourage people listening that, if you're in ministry, you've got to set healthy boundaries, and you've got to come apart for a while into a desert place and rest. And I mean, rest doesn't mean just staying away from the office and not preaching or not doing whatever your ministry area is. I mean, it literally means unplugging from, like we said, all of the distractions and all the things that weigh us down. And one of the things for me, like if I can go to the beach and get a beach chair, sit right there at the ocean and get a book, I am good. And for me, that I can, and in fact, even if I don't have a book, I can just sit there with my eyes closed and just listen to the waves coming in. And that is one of the most relaxing things for me. And so whatever I think that thing is for everybody, you got to find that and do that.
Absolutely, man. I agree. And I'm right there with you. I mean, that was one of the biggest reasons why I actually stepped away from ministry, was because it got to the point where I had to pick ministry over my family, and I almost lost my marriage because of it. I'm going to be completely honest with that. And that was a big factor in almost splitting our house right down the middle. And I swore I would never do that again. And like you said, then we tend to maybe lean too much that way. Because I can find myself sometimes, on my day off, having to answer text messages, and I'm like, oh man, why am I having to deal with this? It's my day off. But at the same time, I'm like, what's 5 minutes worth of texting really? I mean, I could do that while I'm doing laundry or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, we're really blessed. Like you said, it might be on our day off, but one of the nice things about being in ministry, and I mean, hopefully, and I mean, there may be some guys that this might not be their situation, but I'm very blessed, at least where I'm at, that, if I do have something happens and I do need to work on my day off, and it's just something that can't be avoided, the flexibility to be like, well, hey, I'm going to knock off early on the next day, or I'm going to take this other day off. And so, but you've got to be, again, going back to being intentional, because I think we default to, like you said, if something comes up on my day off, and let's just say I spend half of my day off doing something, it's really easy for me to just be like, well, yeah, I know but I've got this other thing going on. I'm just still going to work, and not make that time up. And I think that it's important that we intentionally set those boundaries, that we're having that time we're spending, away from ministry, because, we got to have time to decompress. We got to have time to unplug and unwind. And, I don't think people, unless you've been in ministry, I don't think, and especially preachers, and when you preach, I don't think people realize how emotionally draining that is. And years ago, for me, Sundays was exhausting, because we were a traditional church. So there was Sunday school. I taught Sunday school, preached the 11 o'clock service. We had an evening service. We also did Awana right before the evening service. So I was there early for that, because my kids were involved in Awana. And then for a short period of time, we had a Hispanic ministry for a while. And the guy that was heading that up ended up leaving, and that got dumped in my lap. And so I was preaching a Spanish service in the afternoon too.
Oh my goodness.
And so Sundays, I'm going to have a moment of confession here, and I hope nobody listening will judge me. But so on Sunday nights, my favorite way to unplug and unwind, I don't think this show's even on the air anymore, and this is going to be really out of left field, but I strangely got hooked on watching Bridezillas on Sunday night. And so I would come home, and that was my mindless way of decompressing from the day was to watch these overbearing brides basically, go off on people on their big day. And I don't know, I just found comfort and joy in that. I don't know why. It was weird, but strangely it was therapeutic.
I'm probably going to get judged for this one and probably sticking my foot in my mouth, but mine was The Walking Dead because it came on Sundays, and one church I was serving at, over half of the youth department, and I mean, even the secretary was involved in it, would get together on Sundays and watch The Walking Dead. It was everybody's way of decompressing, taking out all that frustration on a bunch of zombies. So
Absolutely.
yeah, we
I love that
confessions
show.
of some crazy pastors.
I watched that show too. So
now my way of decompressing is trying to catch up on all the Marvel movies. So, that ends up taking up over 2 hours of your time.
that is a very time consuming task.
Mm-hmm. And that one you got to watch out with the family too. You get too wrapped in and spend too much time watching Marvel instead of with your family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So who needs to hear this story, and why do you think that they need to hear it?
So I think that there's probably a lot of guys out there that I think that are probably struggling with that. Especially, I don't know, coming from a fundamentalist background and stuff, I think there are a lot of guys that have come from the same background. And I think, as I said, I had such a skewed view of the pastor position, but I also had a skewed view of church membership too. And while, as we said, it was kind of one of those things where I felt like that I'd elevated the pastor up here, to a higher level, that I'd also kind of seen lived out and demonstrated that church people were kind of to be subservient, I guess, to the pastor, in that the pastor is the man of God. You don't question the pastor. You basically are there for the pastor. And so I think I had a very unhealthy view of church membership too, that there were a lot of times early on, it was kind of, I struggled with the wrong attitude of, well, bless God, I'm the pastor. You need to just do this because that's what I saw modeled. And it was really no discipleship, into my life of, hey, this is what it looks like to shepherd and lead in a biblical way. And I think there may be a lot of people out there that may have had that same experience. And so I think that leads you to a very unhealthy place. And I think it sets you up when you come from that, when you kind of have that mindset of those two things. It sets you up for being disappointed. And I think it sets you up for hurt as well. And things like that on both ends. And so I also think there's people out there that I think that have experienced a lot of things. They've had a lot of baggage in their life and their church life, and I don't think they've ever properly dealt with that. I think there's a lot of us out there, and I say us because I am one of those people that lived through that. That we have not properly, dealt with, and the church hurt, and I think we've not properly healed from those hurts. And I think you even said it in, one of your transitions from one ministry to another. You kind of went from one into another, and I did that as well. When I resigned the church I was pastoring, early on, to come on staff where the church I'm currently at. It was literally like I resigned on Sunday, and the next basically on Monday morning, I was at the church, I was at the new church office. So it was just, and what was crazy was, I went from basically that to we were also tried to plant a church at that point in the current, in that community we were living in. So like I said, where we currently serve is multi-site. And so we were trying to plant one of those locations in that community. And so that was tough too.
I bet.
And ultimately didn't really pan out, but having in that community for us. But I think that, moving from that one thing to the other without having that time to properly heal, it just sets you up. You're headed for, basically, you're going to hit a brick wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what happened to me. And so I think there's a lot of guys out there that maybe there's somewhere in that process. Maybe they haven't hit the wall yet. There may be some people listening, you've already hit the wall. And there may be some you're not there yet, but you feel like, man, I'm just so burned out. I'm just so discouraged. I want to be done with this. And I think there can be healing from that, and that we can avoid, that happening if we can realize. And I think that's where it's good to have a person that we're accountable to, and that, we're even maybe someone who's discipling us. And so I think it's great if we have people in our lives who can spot that in us and be like, hey, look, I think I see some things right now, maybe in your life where it looks like, you're just in an unhealthy place, or, I see some things maybe it looks like you're struggling with, and someone you can talk those things out with and talk through those things with. But I think there's a lot of people out there that, and I think this extends to people that maybe aren't even in ministry, but just church people in general, that we are a culture, at least in the area I live in and the community I serve in, which is about 30 minutes from where I live. Both of these communities are just loaded with people that have church hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I say they're over churched. And so what usually it is they've had some really negative church experience in their past, and they've never really dealt with that. And they've never made peace with that. They've never reconciled that, I guess, in their walk with God. And I think there's so many people, not just pastors, not just people in ministry or leaders, but just people in the church in general, that I think need to hear that, there's healing from church hurt, and you can move on and move past it. And I will say this, I think, I forgot who said this, but we should never waste our pain. And there are a lot of things that are hurtful to us, but God will use that pain to bring about something wonderful and glorious and something good, because we don't know the things we go through. I believe in a lot of ways, God will use for us to minister to somebody else later on down the road. For instance, I know, I can't relate I can't relate to what someone's going through who's lost their spouse. But somebody who has walked through that, they can understand that in a way that I can't. I have both my parents are still living. I haven't lost a parent yet. I can't relate to that yet. I know at some point I'll be able to, but I think all of our experiences, if we will allow God to use them, He will redeem them, and He will use them to help somebody else. And so I think for those that are listening, what I want them to take away from our conversation today is that, I think a lot of times we dwell on the past and we live in the hurt, and we stay there instead of dealing with it, processing it, healing from it, and then allowing God to use that to minister to someone else and help them. Because again, I know, like, currently at the church here, where I'm at, I know we've got a couple different ladies in the church. They've faced breast cancer and they've dealt with that. And the wonderful thing is that there's already been a lady in the church. She's been through that. She's dealt with it. God has brought healing into her life. And so she's able to come alongside these other women who are now facing that. And she's able to minister to them, and she's able to walk with them through that season of life. And she can say, hey, I know exactly what you're thinking, how you're feeling. And, that makes all the difference in the world. I can empathize with them, or sympathize with them rather, but I can't really empathize with them because I've not been there and I've not walked in that yet. So to kind of, I guess, sum all that up and wrap that up, I think that don't allow your hurt to be in vain, because I think that even though there are painful experiences we face, there are things that happen to us. God is so much bigger than our pain and our suffering and our hurt. And the gospel is so much more powerful than that. Mm-hmm. And God can take those things and redeem them. And He can take those things and use them to draw people to Himself and to bring glory and honor to Himself. And ultimately, if going through some of the hurts that I've gone through helps somebody else come to Christ, or it helps them grow in their walk with Christ, then it wasn't wasted. It wasn't in vain. And
It's
there's,
all worth it.
it's all worth it. Absolutely.
All right, man. That's awesome. And that's part two. I'm sorry, that's part one. Now we're going to jump into part two, rapid fire. What's your life verse and why?
So this was just a couple years ago or a few years ago, Mark 10:45, that it says that even the Son of Man, came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. I think I quoted that right. Excuse me. And that really kind of became a life verse for me, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. And it just helps remind me that it's not about me, that
Amen.
it is not about me. And so I'll just mention this really quick. I know we got to move on, but I have a towel in my office and came from a pastor of that church we spent those 2 years at. And I'll never forget it. I went through a leadership class he did. And at the end of that class, he had this towel with Mark 10:45 printed on it. And he got down and put that towel, he put it like on our leg, and just got down and on his knees and said, "You have a pastor who loves you and wants to serve you." And he prayed specifically over each guy in that room.
Wow.
And so that towel is in my office, and wherever I go in life, that towel is going to go with me, because it reminds me of Mark 10:45, and that even as the Son of Man came not to serve, but not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many, that it's not about me. And I'm called to put others ahead of me.
Amen, dude. That's an awesome life verse, and I love that story. It is awesome to have people that are willing to show us that stuff
Absolutely.
through their actions.
Absolutely.
So what do you see as your goal for the next 3 years?
So over the next 3 years, I would say my goal is we're currently involved in a church plant in a smaller community. Well, I say smaller than where I live, but it's actually the community Adam lived in before he moved up there where you guys are at. And so I would say my goal is to see not only that church plant established and thriving, but my goal would be for us to see churches even planted out of our location there, to see us involved in that in a personal way, and then having just an impact on our community, to where if when the name of the church is mentioned, that people instantly think, man, yes, that church loves our community, that church is here for our community. I want us to have that kind of name. And so that would be, I think, my goal over the next 3 years, is for us to see that established, and to see us make disciples in our community, and to multiply that out.
That's I couldn't think of any better goals for a senior pastor in a church plant. So bonus time, what is your favorite restaurant and your favorite dish there?
Okay, so I was thinking about this because you sent me this question earlier. So I've been meditating on this one, thinking. So this kind of, I think, changes for me from time to time. And so I would have to give you, in the moment right now, my favorite restaurant right now is actually Cookout.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I've gotten addicted to Cookout, and it's our lead pastor's fault here at the church, because he and I travel together a lot, and he's like, he loves milkshakes and I love milkshakes. He'd be like, "Hey, you want to stop and get a milkshake?" And I'm like, yeah, you got to twist my arm. And so we went and got some milkshakes one day, and that was back over the summer. And man, I have gotten addicted to Cookout. I went occasionally before then, but so right now, in fact, we just went the other night and got milkshakes. But so my favorite thing to eat from Cookout is the chicken strips tray with fries as my side, with Cajun seasoning on the fries, and cheese bites, which are basically like it's almost like cheese sticks, but basically like a little small bite. And then I get a vanilla milkshake to go with that. That's like, and that is not good at all if you're trying to stay in shape. So terrible. And it's really bad that Cookout is like 5 minutes from my house, so that does not help.
I've been a victim of being too close to a cookout before, living there and being within walking distance. So
Yeah.
I totally feel your pain on that. So folks, you now know where Clint's favorite restaurant is in the moment. So in just a minute, he's going to be able to give you some information, and you're going to know where to send gift cards for Cookout too. Well, Clint, I have had so much fun being able to sit down, and thank you for taking the time to lend us some of your stories from behind your desk. I appreciate your friendship, the passion that you have, the heart that you have for ministry and for the kingdom of God. And, I've really enjoyed getting to hear your story in more detail. The only thing I really have to say is stay faithful, my friend. Keep up the awesome work. And I hope you've enjoyed being able to sit down on the show. And I hope our audience has gained some valuable insight to just what pastors have to deal with. And I'm going to steal something that my wife told me the other day. She heard it on a podcast, and I can't give them credit because I don't remember which one, but the guest on there said that they grew up in the Bible Belt. And if you've not experienced hurt while living in the Bible Belt, just wait, it's coming, because church hurt is real. But the amazing thing is God is bigger than any church hurt and any issue that we could ever face.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, man, I just really appreciate you having me on the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. In fact, the time has flown by. It
Absolutely.
feels like we've been talking like 5 minutes, and so it's been awesome. I don't know. You know, I was thinking about all this. I feel probably the least qualified of anybody to tell anybody anything, but man, I'm so appreciative for the opportunity just to kind of share, my story and where, things I've been through and all that. But absolutely, this has been awesome. I've loved doing it. I'm glad we've gotten to connect through Adam these last few years, and
Yes, sir.
I hope we'll get to hit the golf course again here soon when we get through all this winter weather.
I hope that pastor's golf outing is an annual thing.
Me too. That would be awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed that day, and I need those days.
And for future reference, not to ride with Adam, because he's the one that about flipped it, not me. I was just the influence.
That is true. Now that you say that, I think it was Adam driving. I was going to say I felt pretty safe where I was at, so I was going to say I was a little nervous for you guys on that hill, but y'all brought it back in and you saved it. So, but absolutely.
Him and I will probably be forever stuck in the golf cart together because nobody will want to ride with either one of us. So before we close out, how can people support you and your ministry? Where can they find you at if they want to reach out to you and make a connection?
Okay, so excuse me. So personally, if anybody wants to connect, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Facebook Clint Conner, and then on Instagram at Pastor_Clint, all lowercase. You can connect with me on either one of those. Also, you can connect with our church ministry if you're interested in doing that. Hope Church Clearview. We're on Facebook. We're also on Instagram as well and YouTube. And you can find our website at hopechurchclearview.com or the Hope on the Go app, available in the App Store or the Google Play Store. But yeah, if anyone's listening, I would love to connect with you on social media. In fact, I've connected with a lot of people on social media before I've actually met a lot of them in person. In fact, a story for another time, but that's actually how Adam and I connected initially, was through Facebook before we ever met in person. So,
wow,
which is really cool. So maybe some other time we can talk about that. But yeah, again, you can find me on Facebook, Clint Conner, Pastor Clint Instagram, or the church is Hope Church Clearview, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we would love to connect with you. I'd love to connect with you personally.
absolutely. So All you have to do, folks, is if you've enjoyed this, reach out to Clint if you want to connect with him. And I know he will provide you with his address to send that gift card to Cookout to. So again, folks, thank you for joining us for another episode of Behind the Desk with JK. As I always close, may the Lord bless you and keep you. I love you, but never forget that Jesus loves you more. If you've enjoyed this episode of Behind the Desk with JK, please consider giving it a 5-star review. The more reviews and the higher the review is, the more this podcast will be featured on the podcast apps. Also, be sure to click the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube if you're watching, and if you're listening on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, RSS.com, Anchor.fm, or any other platforms, give it a like and a follow as well. Go on to Facebook and Instagram and give me a like and follow too. Simply search for Behind the Desk with JK. If you have any questions, have any potential guests, or if you would want to be a guest on the show, you can send an email to btdwithjk@gmail.com. Until next time, take care and God bless.